So if you think a little about this just on a little larger perspective, if you happen to be someday in Paris, or if you have been in Paris, you'll know that there's a very beautiful large marble wall which has a very beautiful inscription in French outside the headquarters of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And the paragraph which is carved in the marble is the opening sentence of the Charter of UNESCO. UNESCO being part of the family of United Nations organizations created at the end of the Second World War with the aspiration that there should never be another international conflagration like that. And there again, just by saying that, one can say, oh, well, what went wrong? Because the marble wall is there with this wonderful paragraph, but it's not as if the world has been free from war since the end of the Second World War by any means. But this paragraph, or this sentence, is a very, very powerful statement because it seems directly related both to what I've been saying about this question of attitude and also to what I think probably is of interest to all of you here tonight. It says, in translation, it's usually translated this way, just as wars begin in the human mind, so it is in the human mind that peace must be constructed and defended. So that's kind of interesting if you're paying attention to this subject, because he doesn't say that wars begin with an arms race, or that wars begin with some sort of fundamental flaw in the human mind, or that wars are just inevitable, or that wars are produced by arms manufacturers, or even by governments. It begins with what I think many of us would begin to see is the heart of the matter. It says, just as wars begin in the human mind, so it is in the human mind that peace must be constructed and defended. It's also a sentence which, you know, I've pondered a fair bit, and it's kind of interesting that, in a way, the start of war is so simple in that sentence. Just as wars begin in the human mind, so it is in the human mind that peace must be constructed and defended. So there's some implication there that there's quite a bit more work to be done in terms of peace work than there is in terms of igniting war. And I think if we think about any situation that we're familiar with in our lives, whether it's personally, you know, whether it's in our human relationships, in our families, in our classes, in our organizations, in our work, whatever, just even leaving aside the big international drama, it's quite startling how rapidly and almost unconsciously a ghastly argument can start. And how rapidly people can just divide up into factions, groups, cliques, whatever. I mean, you know, it's almost axiomatic that we could decide to do that tonight. We could decide to create an organization that would work for some noble cause. And we would all sit around and agree on a tremendous set of objectives, and then we would all raise some money, and we'd get a little office, and some people would come to work. And you know that within 48 hours, whoever was in charge would have to start dealing with all the arguments that have broken out. And you say, well, how is this possible? And that there's then this long-term work of constructing and defending peace. So, since I mentioned this sort of point about, you know, we all created an organization, a number of you, you know, kind of chuckled when I said that, so I guess you know exactly what I mean. But for those of you who have come here to lose your naivete tonight, you know, I've always, obviously in the work that I've done, I've had the opportunity to work in a number of organizations and work with people from a wide variety of organizations. And all these organizations, broadly speaking, have been devoted to what you would say is a good cause or a noble ideal. And I can't think of anybody I've ever met from all these organizations who has ever said they were burned out, depressed, fed up, angry, bitter, or well, now we've moved off into other words, probably it's not so polite to mention, but you get the idea. Who said they felt that way because of the difficulty in actually doing the work. And I've never met anybody who said, you know, I am so fed up, you know, with working for this famine relief because there are so many hungry people. And I know, I'm looking over at the Amnesty friends there, you know, but all the years I worked in Amnesty, and you know, in Amnesty we deal with a gigantic uphill struggle to deal with the eradication of torture and that kind of thing. And I've known a lot of people who've suffered very deeply in trying to help others, but I've never met anybody who said, you know, I'm leaving this organization because we have failed to stop torture. But I have met hundreds of people who are completely pissed off about their colleagues, the management, the organization not being listened to, you know, the complete, complete failure to respect procedures. I mean, unbelievable list of problems that drive people completely nuts in organizational life. And that's what seems to really create the burnout and almost self-injury that people often inflict on themselves, and of course on each other, in doing very noble work. So obviously, I've thought about that a lot. And I can say from some of this experience I've had that when you're working, no matter how good-heartedly, trying to deal with issues of aggression in all its different forms, whether it's injustice, whether it's the various forms of oppression, whether you're someone who's working in a hostel for abused women, whether you're working with young kids who are being, literally being driven mad by drug abuse and so on and so forth, that it's extremely easy to fall, you could say, victim, or to unwittingly internalize that same aggression, and then almost unwittingly begin to inflict it on others that you're very close to. For example, just to take an example, I've had a lot to do with police officers in my time. And it's no secret that police culture around the world includes a very, very high level of domestic violence, because the extreme challenges and difficulties that police officers are subjected to in the course of their daily work, unless there's some way in which they're enabled to process that, means that that frustration gets taken out at home on those who they're closest and indeed dearest. And in working situations, I can think of, this sort of from my Amnesty experience, and I don't say this to put you off belonging to Amnesty International, those of you who are here from a local group. In the old days in Iran, there was this head of government called the Shah, and he was, I don't know whether he was nasty as a person, but he certainly presided over a lot of nasty things. And we had a lot of effort to try and curtail the grotesque abuses that were carried out under his regime. So you'd begin to develop this kind of basically hate relationship with somebody you'd never met, But you couldn't get your hands around his neck. But if somebody came into the office, who didn't quite agree with you, those hands were ready to go. And there was a neck within reach. So I don't think this is any kind of unique thing for the work of that particular organization. This is just very, very common. And in her in her book, Practicing Peace in Times of War, Pema Chodron likes to cite, and she does cite there, the wonderful example of seeing a demonstrator at a peace demonstration clubbing someone else with their peace sign. And that's probably the best example of what I'm sort of going to address